Welcome to Straight Line MTB, and I'm out here ready to shred some trails with the YT Izzo, the Transition Spur, and the Ripley AF for the Down Country Showdown. Welcome back to Straight Line MTB, and today is an exciting day because I have the Izzo, the Ripley AF, and the Spur out, and we are going to put it through its paces. We're going to do a timed lap with some climbing and downhill, and then I'm going to take all three into our OHV area to hit some more gnarly trails and some black diamond trails. So these bikes are in the same category. So we have the Spur, it's a 120 front, 120 rear. The Ripley AF is a 130 front, 120 rear, and the YT Izzo Pro Race we have is a 130 front, 130 rear. So they're all in a general category. The tires are a little bit more set up for the aggressive side of things. These aren't going to be a full review of these bikes. We do have a full review on the YT Izzo if that's something you want to check out. And then we'll be working on full reviews individually for the Ripley AF and the Transition Spur. But today we're just gonna do a head-to-head comparison and kind of find out, the differences on the downhills and the climbs. My early predictions for these bikes is that I think that the Spur is gonna be the best climber. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the Ripley AF is probably gonna be the best descender, and the YT Izzo is probably gonna be a blend right in between. So for setup, all the bikes are pretty much stock with a few changes. On our Ripley AF, we do have a different tire setup. I have the Butcher T9 up front and the Specialized Eliminator out back. Our model came with the Assegai tires, so I thought those were a little bit overkill for the purpose of that bike, so we did switch to something a little bit more in between. I know they come stock with the Aggressor, but I think the Butcher and the Eliminator is a good fit for this bike, and it's gonna fit with the narrative of our other bikes where we have the Transition Spur. I have a Kinda Hellcat up front, and then I put the Dissector from the front and I moved it to the rear to give it a little bit more traction because that bike likes to smash pretty well for 120. And then our YT Izzo, it comes with the Forecaster tires. Unfortunately, they're pretty thin, and I think they're a little bit lighter duty than that bike deserves. So out front on that, I have a DHF 3C up front, and then Vittoria Goma out back. And then also on our YT Izzo Pro Race, there were a couple changes we also made. The brakes, I switched the G2 RSC brakes out because they were a little bit underpowered. So the Izzo is going to have a little bit of an edge for braking because it has the Magura MT Trail Sports. And then I did swap out the carbon wheels on the Izzo for the DT Swiss XM 1501. So I do like the feel of the aluminum wheels, and it'll match up a little bit better with our other bikes because they also have aluminum wheels. So let's get to it. I'm gonna hop on these bikes and let's see what they're all about. All right, so I'm back after a long day in the saddle riding these three awesome bikes back to back to back on the same trails, and I timed each lap in each section, and I'm going to share that with you, and also some of the small minute differences that makes each bike unique. So first, on the climbing section of the lap, it's got some short punchy sections, some loose technical, and then just a gravel paved road up to the top. Just enough, I think enough to really get a feel for the bike and to kind of compare each one head to head. So starting with our slowest time was the Ripley AF, which is no surprise, and that's what I thought would happen, is it wouldn't be the fastest climber. Little bit of pedal bob on it, but nothing that would deter you from climbing on this bike. But when you really get on the gas or really grunting, that DW link stiffens up really nice, so you're able to kind of get a little bit of spurt of power. I definitely felt some of the weight on the climbs. This bike comes in at 33.5, so it's a bit heavier than the other two bikes. It's definitely in the saddle, felt a little bit shorter and compact than the other two bikes. The reach numbers are very similar to the other two, but I noticed that it felt a little bit shorter. Compact was good though when I needed to change direction, but I think some of its slower climbing could be down to those really fat wheels and tires. You're getting more rubber on the ground, which might slow you down just a little bit. And then moving on to our second fastest climber was the YT Izzo. So the YT Izzo was noticeably more snappy in the pedaling. It was able to carry speed when you're really grunting to go fast. This bike picked it up and was able to gain your speed a lot quicker than the Ripley AF. I didn't notice any pedal bob. I know it was there, but it wasn't something that I noticed while I was riding it. I did notice the weight, so it did feel quite a bit lighter than the Ripley on the climbs. And that also probably helped with its efficiency climbing up to the top. In the saddle, it felt very comfortable, but it felt very comfortable on the climbs. The Ripley definitely was a little bit more comfortable in the technical sections. The Ripley was able to claw up a little bit better than the Izzo and the Spur, in fact. And that, again, it could be due to those big fat tires. And then moving on to our fastest climber was the Transition Spur, which again, no surprise there. I figured that this would be the fastest climber. The efficiency on the climbs was really good. The YT Izzo had a snappy pedaling, but the Transition just edged it out just a little bit. I really felt like if I needed to get on the gas to grunt up some of these steep climbs or steep sections, that the Spur was ready to go, and it went up really fast. The traction wasn't as ample as it was on the Ripley, of course, and maybe just a little bit more on the Izzo, and that could be down to tire spec too. So like we said in the reviews, that we changed a little bit of the tires, but I think overall, on the climbing, that the Spur was the most comfortable. In the cockpit, the Spur felt like an old friend, because I like riding big enduro bikes, and the Spur felt a lot like the Transition Sentinel. So it has that longer, it felt like it had a longer top tube and just was a little bit more comfortable on the climbs. And onto the downhill part of our test loop. So it was a culvert trail, and this trail is more smooth, it's fast, it's got berms, it's really flowy, it's got some jumps, as well as a couple 2 to 3 foot drops. So not shockingly, the fastest bike on this section was the Ibis Ripley AF. So I found that the Ibis was it was really, really fast. It really pushed me to go faster than maybe I was comfortable with. And that could be due to its shorter feeling in the cockpit. I did feel like I was going a little bit further over the front than I was comfortable with. So I had to be a little bit more mindful of kind of pushing the bike out just a little bit further ahead. But man, this thing ate up the little chatter. It was definitely the most comfortable in that section. Going into the turns, it cornered really well. It wasn't the best corner of the group. And I think some of that could be down to the heavier tires, maybe the rolling resistance. But going into the jumps, I will say that for being the heaviest bike, it felt like it caught the most air, and I aired out one jump and I thought I was gonna crash. I got so high on this bike. So that was really surprising. And then also going into the drops. There's 2 drops on this trail. They're not big drops, like 2 to 3 foot drops. The Ibis Ripley handled the drops the best. And again, it could be down to those fatter wheels and tires just absorbing a little bit more of the trail. But that was not a surprise, as that was what I expected. And then moving on to our next fastest bike, shockingly for me, was the Transition Spur. Now, it wasn't a lot faster, but in the short section, it was enough to be faster. I think it's down to the geometry of that bike. The Spur has the longest wheelbase of the group, and like I said, it had the longest feeling in the cockpit. And having the shortest amount of travel, I think it was able to pump and kind of pedal a little bit faster, and that's where that snappy pedaling came in. So on the flat sections, when I want to get a little bit faster, this bike responded quickly. I think it was on par with cornering with the Ibis Ripley, but again, coming out of the corner, it was able to pedal really fast and catch up some of that speed. So moving on to the Izzo, which had the slower time of the 3, I felt like the Izzo felt like it was the fastest, and that could be down to maybe it wasn't absorbing the chatter as well. I felt like the rear end would clap a little bit in the back, maybe lose a little bit of that touch to the ground. And I did adjust the rebound here and there previously, so I have it set up, I think, the way I like it. But I will say, for the Izzo being the shortest wheelbase, it changed directions the best. I felt like wherever I wanted it to go, this bike was ready to go. If you want to turn real fast, it's there. Work around some of the nasty, chunky parts, no problem. And I felt like it came out of the corners the fastest. It was really, I think the Izzo is named after some samurai blade, and I really feel like that this bike's character really represents that, is that it's really able to cut and bob through the trail really well. On the drops, I'd say it was on par with the Spur. You know, the Spur and the Izzo absorbed the drop well. I wouldn't say it was as well as the AF, but I didn't feel like I bought harsh bottom out or anything like that. So that brings us to the combined climbing and descending. So the fastest descender was the Ibis Ripley AF, and the fastest climber was the Transition Spur. But when you combine those two times, the Transition Spur won pretty handily due to its awesome climbing ability, and it made up that time that it was lacking on the downhill. So that was a surprise. So after our test loop, we decided to take it into the OHV area to take these bikes into a little bit more demanding terrain than you would think they can handle. So the first trail that we took it on was called Stonewall, and this trail has some steep sections into some hairpin turns, and it also has a couple punchy climbs after those sections. And then also it has a little bit of chunk sprinkled in the trail as well. So on this section of trail, shockingly, the fastest bike of the group was the Transition Spur. It eked out the Izzo just a tiny bit, but I'm gonna give it the win because on the Spur, I started just a tiny bit slower than I did on the other three. So the Spur, that thing felt so good. When you came to those corners, this bike cornered really well. I think the light weight of this bike and the maneuverability really helped, but where it really helped, I think, get the win on this trail is those punchy climbs. So the Spur is the easiest climber of the group, and it feels very effortless getting up some of those punchy climbs, and it carried the speed really well through those turns and those down sections, which helps you get back up those really steep sections. Coming at speed, I felt like it was the most confident, and that could be due to its longer wheelbase and longer reach. The handlebars are 800 millimeter. I felt like those might be a little bit too wide for this bike. It did affect the steering just a tiny bit, so maybe a 780 bar to kind of quicken up that steering a little bit. But that was shocking that was the fastest lap on this trail on this bike. Coming up, shockingly, it was not the Ripley AF, was the YT Izzo. So the YT Izzo took second place on this trail. Again, that maneuverability of the YT Izzo really came into play here. And I think the only reason I mean, less than a second difference between the Izzo and the Izzo and the Spur. And it could be down to that the Spur climbs just a little bit better. It's just a touch more snappy on the climbs. But the Izzo definitely wins the award for the most maneuverability. It was changing those directions in some of those corners. It was just whipping right around, and it does have the shortest wheelbase of the group, so that wasn't a big surprise. But what the biggest surprise was the Ripley AF, which was the slowest in that section. And again, it could be down to those punchy climbs where the other two bikes are better climbers, and the Ripley AF had a little bit less forgiving on those climbs. But on the downhill sections, those big fat tires, they were eating up the little chatter really, really well. I think it made up some of that time from those climbs, but ultimately it couldn't catch up with the other two bikes because of those punchy climbs. But I was very surprised and shocked to see that. And now, after Stonewall, I took it into Rocky Trail. So this is in the OHV park again, and it is a black diamond trail. So this trail is just loose, chunky, big rocks, and you really, especially on these bikes, gotta pick your way down. It's not like, these aren't enduro bikes where you can just smash and go wherever you want. Again, I can't believe that this happened, but the fastest bike of the group for me, for my riding style and how my day went, was a Transition Spur. It was crazy. It did not feel the fastest, I will say that. But again, it could be that longer wheelbase. And I think it also can be down to it has the narrowest wheels of the group. So it has a 26 millimeter internal versus the Izzo's 30 versus the Ripley's 35. So that could have helped it. So it's not touching as many rocks and it's able to weave around some of those nasty loose rocks and you're not touching as much issues out there. But yeah, it felt really good. And I think as far as in the cockpit, I felt like I had the best amount of space. I don't know. It didn't feel the fastest, but looking at the times, it was faster, and it was really shocking and exciting because something I did not expect. So another shocker, again, not the Ripley AF for me. It was the YT Izzo was the next fastest. And this is a short trail. It's not a very long trail. It's about maybe just under half a mile. It's very short, very fast. But I will say of the three bikes, the YT Izzo was the sketchiest. There's a couple sections on the trail where I thought I was gonna fall and I thought we were gonna be done filming because that's how gnarly this trail is. And if you fall, you're gonna crack your melon. A couple times the rear end lost traction and I almost crashed into another big rock. And then there's a part where it's a real quick steep down where you kind of got to be careful and get the bike out in front of you or jump it. I'm not the jumping type, so that is another part where I felt like I was going to go over the bars a little bit. But shockingly, all those issues that I had on that trail, it beat the Ibis Ripley AF, which is very surprising. And so speaking of the Ripley AF, I don't know what it was. I felt like I was really on my game because I rode the Ripley third. So I already had 2 laps on Rocky and I rode the Ripley last. And I was very surprised that it had the slow. It was 2 seconds behind the Spur. And again, it could be down to those fatter tires. They're just touching more rocks on the trail, maybe slowing down a little bit more. But I will say as far as comfort level on the downs that the Ripley definitely beat the other 2. I definitely didn't feel like I was, you know, having an issue and having to maneuver it as much as the other 2. The Ripley is a little bit more point and shoot than the Spur or the Izzo. But I think that might have been a downfall a little bit to the bike on the speed is that the Spur and the Izzo, you're trying to pick your line a little bit quicker and going faster, whereas the Ripley's giving you a little bit more confidence, so you're trying to smash a little bit harder, which might have slowed it down just a bit. So again, this is just my experience riding this bike. You could have a totally different experience, but I will say of these 3 bikes, you cannot go wrong. And I do understand they are different. We have an aluminum bike, and then we have a YT Izzo with a higher end spec, and then all different travel. So I do understand they are a little bit different bikes, but again, it's surprising that the little guy took some of the fastest downhills and the fastest time on our lap. So that was pretty surprising. All these bikes are amazing, but let's talk about value. Which of these is the value pick? So even though the YT Izzo Pro Race is $5,300, it presents the best value. You're getting X01 drivetrain, you're getting Fox factory suspension, you're getting the high-end DT Swiss carbon wheels, and you're getting carbon bars. It's just a great package for $5,300. You really can't beat it. And then speaking of our budget pick, I know the Ibis Ripley AF coming in at $3,300. Kind of seems like it may not compare with these bikes as much, but I think for $3,300, you're getting an amazing bike. You are getting Fox performance suspension, but I think it performs well. It's performance. I didn't find any issue with it. The drivetrain on our bike is all GX, aside from the cranks, which are NX. You're getting the Ibis wheels, the S35s. I think they're a really great wheel. The only thing I would change on them is the brakes. I don't like the G2 brakes. They're a little bit underpowered, and that goes for the YT and the Transition as well. That brings me to the bike I will have to say that was my favorite, and now after today, kind of solidifies that for me is the Transition Spur. At $5,000, the GX build, I think it's well thought out. I think compared to other boutique or bigger name brands, that price is right there in line with the others. It doesn't have the best value compared to some of the other direct-to-consumer bikes, but I think you're getting a really solid build package. That SID fork was not as noodly as I thought. I think it edged out the stiffness of the Fox 34 on both of these bikes. The performance, it showed me today that uphill, downhill combination was the fastest. And it's a really fun bike, and I do appreciate that it is the lightest bike of this group at just a touch over 28 pounds how I have it set up with the insert and a little bit heavier tires. And I definitely feel that on the trail. All right, thank you so much for joining me. I was super excited to do this video, and hopefully it's helpful to you guys. And just to reiterate, none of these bikes are bad. You can get the Ibis Ripley, the Izzo, or the Spur, and you're gonna love it. They're all great, great bikes. All the differences for these bikes were just very small and characters of the bike. So it may not have been better here, but the character of it kind of picked it up on the downhill or the uphill. So I think they're all great bikes and you cannot go wrong. So we're super happy to have any of these bikes. So again, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to join us on straightline_MTB on Instagram and TikTok, as well as straightlinemtb.com. If you guys have any questions about any of these bikes, the differences or comparisons, let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. We can't do this channel without you guys, and we appreciate all the support we're getting. Again, thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next video.